Now let's jump back in time and take a look at the BBC Symphony Orchestra. Spitfire Audio's BBC Symphony Orchestra has been the most talked about virtual instrument of 2019, and for good reason. With 55 instruments, 418 techniques, and more microphones than you could fit into your studio, there's plenty to love about the BBC SO. The BBC Symphony Orchestra has a beautiful, cohesive tone that can only be achieved by recording an entire orchestra in a single space with the right equipment. It might not be perfect, but it's an unprecedented and landmark achievement for Spitfire Audio that represents the most comprehensive all-in-one sample orchestral library to date. Hi, I'm Rayburn Johnson from Sample Library Review, and today we'll be checking out the BBC Symphony Orchestra by Spitfire Audio. The BBC Symphony Orchestra is Spitfire Audio's most ambitious project to date, with over 200 hours of recordings compiled into over 1 million samples of the BBC Symphony Orchestra at their home in Maida Vale Studios. The BBC Symphony Orchestra comes housed in Spitfire Audio's custom standalone plugin. Over 200 hours of recordings have been presented in over 1 million samples covering all parts of the BBC Symphony Orchestra. There are 55 ensemble and solo instruments with 418 techniques and 11 microphone positions, 5 spill signals, and 2 stereo mixes by Jake Jackson. The BBC Symphony Orchestra is available from Spitfire Audio for the download price of $999 and can also be purchased on a preloaded external SSD drive for an additional $249. So one of the very first things you're going to notice when you open the BBC Symphony Orchestra is the plugin. Now, a lot of folks are going to be used to seeing this with things like Hans Zimmer strings or the Labs offerings. It's a very similar interface to what you find there. But essentially, the point remains that it is a exclusive proprietary engine that Spitfire has created just for their products. So in this one, unlike most of the orchestral libraries that you're probably used to using, including those made by Spitfire, this one is not in Contact. It's in this separate engine. You can see that the interface is really sleek. I personally like this black color. I will say that there's a lot of unused space here. I mean, you can see over here, there's quite a bit of blank, empty space. I know that's bothered some people. It personally doesn't bother me. One thing I really like is the fact that you can resize the interface by stretching here. You can expand or contract it. And really, you have all of your features here. This is a very fully featured engine, and I really enjoy it. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. I've got the Violins 1 ensemble loaded up, so we're just going to play through some of the articulations and go through some of the instruments here to let you get a first look. And you can tell there I was playing a little bit with the vibrato as well. You'll see that there's 3 different places on the interface. There's, of course, the main articulation browser, but then when you click over here, we'll get into the microphones a little bit later. There are a plethora of microphones to choose from in this library. And then lastly, you'll see the effects. You can see we've got reverb, release, tightness, variation, and vibrato. And I actually have vibrato assigned to my MIDI controller so that I can control it here. So you can hear in that in the last thing I was playing with the legato, you could hear that vibrato coming in and out. The tightness here, this is really useful for things like spiccatos. Let's go ahead and just jump into the spiccatos so that you can hear what I mean. So let's go over and look at that tightness, just so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So if I take the tightness down, so you can hear they're really tight if I go all the way to the left. And if I go here, well, actually, I'm not hearing a ton of difference there. Let's try the staccatos. Let's try playing with the tightness here. And you'll notice that in the strings, there are just a lot of different articulations. You'll see the browser here at the bottom, that as I click to the right, you'll see that there are all of the different articulations available. One thing, too, to make note of here is that while there's not a purge feature like you'll find in Contact, you can unload the articulations that you're not using to save on RAM. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the purge feature in Contact, that's where you can actually not only purge the different articulations and unload them from RAM, but you can actually unload every single sample from every single key so that you can only have loaded in the samples for the keys that you're using. So that's a really nifty feature. You won't find that here, but I do like the fact that you can unload the articulations. Keep your eye on the RAM, on the memory here. As I load different instruments, you will notice some of them are pretty huge. Some of them get up into several gigabytes. I've even seen as many as 3 and 4, or even 5 gigabytes at times. So it's something to keep in mind if you have a smaller machine or if you're dealing with a lower amount of RAM, but the sample set here is really beautiful. Let's go into some of the different ones. Here's the long flautando, which Spitfire's really known for their flautando. Gorgeous. Lovely, lovely, lovely. The pizzicato. All right. Let's go into the long concertino. Really, really beautiful. And just your regular longs. And again, you'll hear there that I'm taking the vibrato out. And then I'll bring it in. Beautiful. The samples here are just really gorgeous. One thing I really like about the samples in this library, as opposed to a lot of the Spitfire libraries, is, as you guys probably know, Spitfire goes into Air Studios for most of their libraries. And while Air Studios has an unprecedentedly beautiful, warm, rich, wet tone, I don't always want that wet and rich tone. Sometimes I want dry so that I can tailor the sound to my own liking. And that's one thing I like about this being recorded at Maidavale Studios, is that you do get that drier sound that you have more control over. And as we'll get into the mics here in a few minutes, you'll see that you really have a ton of control over the sound because you have every mic position available that you could even imagine. Let's try the tremolos. And you've got your Bartok pizzicato. And one thing that I really like too is you have, a lot of orchestral libraries don't even come with harmonics in the strings. You actually have two kinds of harmonics, both the long and the short. I mean, that's just beautiful. Really, really like that. And we've got a second kind of spiccatos, which is also unusual for an all-in-one orchestral library. We have consordino spiccatos. And long solponticello. And let's do one more. Tremolo solpont. All right. And one thing you'll also notice about the BBC SO is not only does it come with the ensembles, the different ensemble sections, such as violins 1 and violins 2, but you also have the first chair or the leader solo instruments for each of these sections as well. One thing I really like about this browser is you can actually click the little play button to hear a preview of each one, which really comes into handy for those folks who are not necessarily familiar with all of the orchestral instruments. So, if you weren't familiar, for instance, with an oboe, you can get a preview of what an oboe sounds like. I really like that. I think that's helpful. And you can also change the browser so that you're not looking at everything, but maybe you only want to look at the strings. So you can click the strings and it will only show you the strings, which is nice. So let's go ahead and check out some of the leader instruments. Let's try violins 1 leader. We'll load that up. One thing I will mention is that I do have this on an SSD. You'll see that it is still loading, and there are times it can take a little longer than what you might expect, especially being loaded from an SSD. Honestly, I normally load most of my libraries from a hard disk without any problems, a 7200 RPM hard disk. And so loading them from an SSD, I would have expected them to be lightning fast. This is a huge library. It's over 500 gigabytes, and there are over 1 million samples. So there's a lot to load here, and it can take some time. So just keep that in mind. Let's try the long flautendo. It's a really, really nice solo instrument. I'm really impressed that you get that. That's not something that you usually see in an all-in-one library. And another thing, too, to mention is, often all-in-one libraries give you ensembles and not individual instruments. So you might have, a high strings ensemble and a low strings ensemble, such as in the Albion libraries that Spitfire offers. But I'm really impressed that in this one, you actually get the individual instrument sections, such as violins 1 and violins 2, and you also get the solo instruments. Very, very nice. Staccato. And let's try pizzicato. And let's try the concertinos. I love that you have that controllable vibrato. It really makes a difference. Here's with it completely off. And I'll bring it in slowly. Very nice. I really like that a lot. And some of the trills here. Here's a minor second. And tremolo. Soltasto. It just really has a lovely, lovely tone to it. So that's a little bit of the violin's leader 1 section. I'm going to jump down to the cellos. Let's load that up. So let's jump down here. It's very nice. There's a very, very rich cellos. Oh, just beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And there's a lot of different, as you can see, you've got 3 entire pages of articulations, but what I would like to do now is to take you through some of the different microphone options. There's just, there are literally 4 pages of microphones here. You can see everything from the mixes that you have from Jake Jackson to close tree, outriggers, ambient mics. You've got a mono, which kind of harkens back to the old days of the BBC Orchestra, where they were recording the entire orchestra with a single mono microphone. You have the leader microphone. You have stereo, mid, sides. You've got even spill mics, which this is something I've honestly never seen in another orchestral library. These spill mics are where they're actually letting you hear the sound of, in this instance, the cellos being recorded from, for instance, the microphones that are being used for percussion, the microphones being used for the brass or the woodwinds. What that does is it really glues the sound together because it lets you capture that bleed that you get when an entire orchestra is playing together instead of individually. It's just a really, really great feature. Now, the one thing I will say is as you load these microphones, you'll see that the RAM definitely increases. So, I'm going to bring in the close. You'll see the memory count go up here. So, just something to keep in mind as you begin to do this. But you'll definitely notice a difference in sound as well. So I'm going to take the mix down. Let's start out with just the close mics. Let's bring in the outriggers. And it'll take a moment for those to load. They don't come in immediately. Let's bring in the tree. Just really, really, really nice. I mean, there's just the possibilities for sound shaping are really endless when you have this many microphones. Let's go to the balcony. I really like the balcony. Give it a moment to load here. You can see the count still going up. I think we've loaded. I just really, really love the microphone options. It honestly is just staggering how many microphone options you have. The one thing is you have to kind of be careful. You have to go through the mics and actually take them down. You can, of course, turn them off with a single button, but it's easy to leave some on because there's just so many. There's literally 4 pages here. Another thing I really like is on the close mic. So for instance, I have the close mic here. You'll see that you actually can change the stereo image of the close mic signal. So listen to this as I move this around. I mean, again, the sound shaping possibilities are just mind-numbing. There's just so many. Let's go ahead and jump over just for one more string section. Let's go to the basses. And this time, I'm going to let you hear the difference between mix number 1 and mix number 2. Now, these are the mixes that Jake Jackson did for Spitfire, and they're really, really well done. So if all of these microphone options completely overwhelm you, that's totally understandable. Don't let them overwhelm you. Just use one of these prefab mixes because they honestly are great. Let's go to, I want to throw some staccato on here. Now listen to mix 2, which is a little more aggressive. just a really, I can't rave enough about these mics. I know that some folks have complained that it's just overkill. It's just too much, and they would like to have had kind of a professional package and a more introductory, or, you know, a simpler package that only offered a couple of different mixes and mic positions. But honestly, that is such a nitpicky complaint to me because I know the library is huge and takes up over 500 gigs. But in my honest opinion, I'm so grateful Spitfire included all of these mic options. I don't have to use them if I don't want to, but they're there. And usually with Spitfire in the past, you would have had to pay quite a bit more to get what they would have called a professional edition to get all of these microphones. So I love that they give you that from the get-go. Really great. So let's move into another instrument type. How about the horns? Let's check out the horns A4, which are 4 horns. So let's load that up. And in each instrument, you'll see, of course, you have a different number of articulations. Some you have more, some you have less. The strings tend to have quite a few more. There's 2 pages here with the horns, which for a total of 10 different articulations, which is a really nice amount. Now, one thing I will say is if you'll notice there is a pretty significant difference in the volume between some of the articulations. I mean, we went from a legato that was very loud and pronounced to a really understated staccatissimo, and just something to be aware of. I mean, you can always, of course, you know, equal that out in the mix and in your DAW, but just something to be aware of. I would like to have seen those be a little more balanced, but it's definitely not a deal breaker. Now, one thing you can do with the multi-tongues as well, which I really like, is you'll see this variation button. So when you're doing the multi-tongue articulation, when you change it, you'll notice that the number of hits on that actually changes. So we're going from 3, 4, all the way to 5. So that's really, really nice. I like that they did that. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Just for fun, let's try the solo horn, just so you can get a feel for the difference between the two. Really, really nice. right, let's jump to, let's try the tenor trombones. You can see on these, there's 8 articulations, so not a second page on these. As I say, you get a different number with each instrument. All right, let's go ahead and jump into, well, just for fun, let's try the contrabass tuba. Actually, let's just try the regular tuba. All right, let's move on to the winds. The woodwinds, let's go for the oboes. And I don't know if you noticed, but that's a significant volume drop there. Not quite sure why that is, but definitely something that's noticeable. Let's jump down. Ooh, let's try the flutes out. All right, let's try the bassoon here. Let's do the solo bassoon. Let's see what we have. Let's go for something low. Let's try the contrabassoon. All right, let's move down to the percussion now. Now the percussion, you'll see that you have your untuned percussion, your timpanis, harp. So there's all sorts of different things here. There's actual tuned instruments and your regular percussion that you would expect to find, such as your bass drums and snares and that kind of thing. So let's start with some of the tuned percussion first. Let's try the harp. Really, really nice. I love that they've included this kind of thing. Let's try the marimba. Let's try the actual untuned percussion. Now, one thing that's unusual here that you'll notice is in most orchestral libraries, whereas you have separate patches for different instruments, for instance, you might have a bass patch and a snare patch. Here, they've used the articulations to divide up the instruments, which is interesting. I think that's some people are going to love that. Some people are not going to love it. I actually do like it a lot because it allows you within a single instrument to use key switches to change the actual instrument, which I think is really, really helpful. You can also, of course, you could use a separate instance for each instrument and just load that articulation and unload. Speaking of which, let's actually talk about how to load and unload articulations. So you'll see a little edit button here. All you have to do if you want to unload something is just exit over here or uncheck it over here and then save it. So really, really interesting. For instance, if I wanted to get rid of the toys, I could just do this, and you'll notice that it unchecks it. I can save it, and then it won't be there. But I want toys. So we're going to save that. That might have been a Freudian slip because with 2 kids, I do enjoy toys. I don't know if you can hear that, but there's actually a really gentle drum roll there, bass drum roll. Okay, I'm glad we left the toys in there. That's a fun one. Let's look at the tubular bells. Yeah, this is a very, very nice library. A few things just to show you before we wrap up here is you'll notice that I'm not showing you key switches on the keyboard, but you actually can set those up. I really like that. The key switches are completely controllable. Of course, you can just go here and you can say, okay, for that articulation, I want to set it to C0. And you can, or you could say, let's say if I wanted to do C2, you'll see here that it lights up. Or if I wanted to make this articulation, let's say I wanted to make it B1. Then as I go back and forth between the two, you'll see that it works. I really, really like that. The other thing I like that they've done that I've not seen in a lot of other sample libraries is the way that you control the key switch. You can, now on this one, they actually have a lot of different ones here. I haven't even seen this one. That's really nice. You can do it by CC, velocity, MIDI channel, speed, program change message. But the thing I was actually going to show you that I really like is this activate feature. You can either set it to be normal, to act as a normal key switch, where when you push the key, it changes to that articulation permanently until you push another key, or you can hit the latch function, and it will actually only activate that articulation while you're holding down that key switch. When you release the key switch, it will no longer be on that articulation. I really, really like that. I think it's very, very helpful. Overall, this interface is really, really nice. This middle button, it's very different than normal. Usually you're used to seeing that be the mod wheel. In this instance, you can actually control different things depending on the instrument. So you'll see here, I can either make this the reverb or the tightness in this particular instrument. But if I go to something else, like let's say maybe, let's go to the violas and see what's there. Could be the same thing for the violas. Okay, on the violas it's a little different. You can do the reverb or the vibrato and use this center button to control either of those. I like that. I like any time that a developer gives you options. And here I really like the fact that the biggest button on the screen is not tied to one particular control, but depending on the instrument, I have different selections that I can use. So you can see here, they've grayed out some selections that you can use on other things, like the tightness. There's no use in having tightness on legato, obviously, so instead I have vibrato. But if I change to spiccato, you'll notice that now I have the release and the tightness that I can actually change this button to. That's really, really helpful. Another feature I like about the interface is as you float over the different controls, you'll see in the bottom left-hand side of the screen that it actually gives you a description of what that control does, which is really handy. It's actually like that better than Contact's version of the question mark, which can get really annoying as it shows up on screen and you have to dismiss it. So I really like the way they've done that. There's just a lot to like about this library. There are a few negative things that, like I say, I've pointed out, such as some of the difference in volume between the articulations. It can be pretty drastic at times. That, of course, can be overcome by using different microphone positions, and obviously you have to take into account the fact that some articulations are just going to be quieter. So that's something to take into account. Another thing is the RAM. This can use a significant amount of RAM. You'll notice that for the most part, we really haven't used a lot on the patches that we've been looking at tonight. But keep in mind, as you load more and more microphones, that RAM count can really, really get high. So just something to be aware of. I would suggest to you, if you're not using articulations, to go ahead and unload those unless you have a significant amount of RAM, because it's really going to help the performance of your machine. Again, all in all, I really, really like this library. Personally, I think this is probably, gosh, if this is not the absolute best all-in-one orchestral library on the market right now, it's definitely up there as one of the top ones. The things that it gives you that you won't find in a lot of other all-in-one libraries, you get the solo instruments instead of getting ensembles of mixed instruments where you might have high strings and low strings, that would combine the basses and cellos or the violas and the violins and not give you separate violin 1 and violin 2. You have the dedicated instrument sections all throughout this library. You have dedicated sections for violins 1, dedicated sections for violins 2, on down the line. I really, really love that. I love the control. And finally, again, I'm going to say it again, the microphones. It is truly amazing how many mic positions you get here. I mean, you get 4 pages of microphones. I think it's 11 positions altogether, 2 mixes, 4 or 5 spill mics. I mean, it's really phenomenal, the number of, the amount of control they've given you by including that. So this has been the BBC Symphony Orchestra by Spitfire Audio. Again, I highly recommend check out the demonstration videos, check out the articulations. I think there's 418 different techniques on offer here. So there is just a lot to love. Most of all, I'll say that I love the tone of this library. It has a warm, silky tone to it. It's dry enough without being bone dry. You can get the room in there by adding the balcony, the ambience, the outriggers, all the different mics there, but you can get a very, very dry signal if you want it. So you have full control over the sound, but the samples are really gorgeous. I mean, after all, it's the BBC Symphony Orchestra. So I think you're going to really enjoy this library. I know that I do, especially for orchestral recordings. Many of us are used to really big and bold and brash orchestral libraries that honestly aren't very realistic. You might have 8 horns instead of 4, which is, not something you're going to see in many symphony orchestras. This is actually a classic symphony orchestra. It is geared at a classical setting. So, of course you can use this in trailers. Of course you can use it in any orchestral track, but it's going to give you a true orchestral sound, a true symphony orchestra sound. It's not going to be bloated or inflated like many libraries you see. They definitely have their place, don't get me wrong. I love a big library to use in trailers and in dramatic songs, but this is a true symphony orchestra plugin. I think you're going to like it. I would love to know what you think about this library. Are you planning on purchasing it yourself? Or have you already purchased the BBC Symphony Orchestra? Comment below and share your thoughts. Please like, share, and subscribe, and be sure to visit samplelibraryreview.com for news, reviews, and our weekly deal compressor. We really appreciate your support.